All right. Well, thank you all for coming this afternoon. Earlier today, Secretary of Defense Hagel previewed the Pentagon's 2015 budget. That's the budget that starts in October. And that budget will be submitted to Congress next week. As part of his proposal, the Secretary is proposing that we divest the entire A-10 fleet, which of course is crucial to our community, to Davis-Monthan, and to the country at large. And it's important to stress, this is a proposal. This is not a decision. We're far from a decision yet. It's not a surprise that the Secretary would be making these decisions or proposals, particularly on the A-10. We've heard this before. I've questioned it before in meetings with the Air Force, particularly with the Air Force Chief of Staff, General Welsh. And I will continue to question why we're doing this, because it makes no sense when you look at what the A-10 does and can continue to do for our country. This is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. It's an issue that both sides of the aisle feel very concerned about. About a couple of months ago, I joined with my colleagues on both the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike, to put a proposal or to put language in the law that would prohibit the Air Force from even making any attempt to retire or divest the A-10. And as a result of that, which became law when the President signed it last year, the Air Force cannot retire, plan to retire, or otherwise take steps to retire the A-10 for all of calendar year 2014. And we intend to do the same with the law that we'll be discussing that gives authorization to the Department of Defense. We'll be doing the same again when we do that in the spring. We've been fighting hard. When I say we, I mean my colleagues across the chambers and across the aisle, to keep the A-10 flying. And why do we do that? First of all, the A-10 is the most effective close air support for our troops on the ground. When I speak to Army and Marines and others, including Air Force personnel who have been deployed to Iraq and to Afghanistan, and when they get into a firefight or when they're in a situation where they need help, the one asset that they always say is the most important to them is the A-10. And they say that when the A-10 flies over, when they're in those situations, they know that it's going to be a much better day. And I'm going to continue to work hard with my colleagues. When I go back to Congress tomorrow, to Washington tomorrow, we'll immediately be taking up this issue with people in the House Armed Services Committee, on which I sit, and with members across the board. As a member of Congress, I'm going to fight hard to make sure that the A-10 is not grounded, is not divested, is not mothballed, because we need it for national security. And I'm going to make sure that we point out the importance of keeping it in the air and flying here at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. This is an issue that is very personal with me. I grew up on Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. My dad was in the Air Force. I lived there for most of my youth. I met my wife there. And I've been involved with trying to support and protect the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base since I was a young man. And this will continue, particularly in light of this proposal from Secretary Hagel. The Secretary says that the A-10 can be, the role of the A-10 can be filled by the F-35. That may happen someday, but we all know that the F-35 is still delayed in production. It's a long way off. It's a stealth aircraft, not an aircraft designed to do what the A-10 does best, and that is provide close air support. The A-10 can fly slow and low and come in to protect our troops on the ground, and no other aircraft that's flying today can do that same mission. We are going to work closely with people here in our community, including the Southern Arizona Defense Alliance, the DM-50, the fighter wing, the 162nd Fighter Wing of the Air National Guard Guardians, a community support group, and our colleagues at in Fort Huachuca, the Fort Huachuca 50. The Fort Huachuca 50 has joined SATA and is part of this consortium across our region to make sure that our military missions are properly protected. This announcement today is not a surprise, and we will continue the fight that we've already started last year to make sure it never becomes a decision. It's just a proposal. So we're going to be working collectively in Washington to turn this around. And for now and into the far future, we're going to be protecting the A-10 and keep it flying. You know, when I look at what this decision represents, it doesn't seem to be very well thought out. We have spent over $1 billion improving the A-10. We have upgraded the electronic package. We have re-winged all of the aircraft, or in the process of re-winging all the aircraft. We have given the A-10 another 15 to 20 years of flying time. And now we're going to take it out of commission. Makes no sense to me. The savings over the course of 4 years, which is the proposal that the Secretary made today, would save about $700,000 a year after having already spent $1 billion to upgrade. It just doesn't make sense in terms of cost effectiveness or certainly the safety of our troops on the ground. I've opposed the reason that we're doing this from the very beginning of my time in Congress, and the reason in one word is sequestration. The sequestration effort to cut our budget across the board without regard to priorities is the culprit here. And we need to end sequestration and find other more prudent and responsible ways to deal with the deficit, to cut our budgets. This is not the way to do it. When I spoke recently last year with General Wells, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, at a hearing, and I asked him about the A-10 and why he would even consider proposing the grounding of the A-10, he didn't answer right way. And I pressed him, and he finally said, Congressman, one word, sequestration. And I really believe that a decision like this made on an irresponsible proposal like sequestration is something we have to fight, and we will fight until we win this fight. And when I return to Congress this week, I'll be mobilizing all of the people who worked with me before to get that done, and here at home as well. I intend to go back to Congress to continue what I've done from the very beginning, and that is to be the voice of this community on issues of importance. And right now, there could be an issue of greater importance to our future, both economically as well as from national security perspective, than saving the A-10 and keeping it flying. So with that, if you have questions, I'll be glad to try to respond.
Congressman, as you mentioned and we've discussed, you got language put in the defense bill last year that prohibits the Air Force and one would assume DOD from even thinking about basically the retirement of the A-10 in calendar 2014. We're in February, it looks like they're thinking about it. Is that a violation of the Defense Reauthorization Act, even proposing this?
We're going to be looking into that. I have serious questions about whether this is properly abiding by the instructions that Congress gave to the Department of Defense, which was signed into law by the President. The Congress, as you well know, is one important branch of the checks and balances system we have in this country, and I want to make sure that the language we put in, which was agreed to by the Senate and signed by the President, is properly adhered to. And we're going to be looking into that. In fact, my staff are already looking at that issue.
Congressman, go ahead. Did you find anything that you liked in the budget preview? What are they doing right?
Well, you know, in the authorization of the law that we passed, we did take some important steps to deal with sexual assault in the military, which has become a very serious issue for the country and for all branches. And that will continue to be addressed. But there's not a lot to like in this budget, quite frankly. What we have seen is not only an impact on the A-10, but the U-2, which has been an effective surveillance asset to the country since the 50s. That is also proposed to be grounded. But also beyond that, we see some in the proposal an effort to change the way TRICARE works. TRICARE is the health plan that military personnel and their families receive. It's a promise we made to them when they joined the military, and it's a promise we have to keep. And there are some changes that would be made to TRICARE that I'm opposed to and I've opposed before. So we're going to go down each and every item that is affecting the military in this country and take issue where we need to take issue. But those are some that I'm concerned with. And that's the purpose of our congressional meetings that will be starting in the next few days. We're going to really lean hard on the military chiefs of staff to justify why we would do some of these things. Yes, sequestration is an issue, but there are other ways to deal with the sequestration issue. One way is to get rid of it, but within those constraints, we don't have to make these drastic decisions. So we'll be questioning that as time goes on and fighting hard to make sure that they make more prudent decisions around our military posture. What we really have to do is make sure that even as we deal with the budget deficit, that we don't compromise the national security of this country. And I'm determined to fight hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have to be prepared for current and future conflicts. This budget, in my view, does not do that.
Congressman, Secretary Hagel said that if the sequester kicks in 2016, as it's set to do, that then there would be more base closings. So my question is that at that point maybe DM is in trouble, and especially if we should lose the A-10?
Well, we're going to fight hard. When I say we, I mean the members of the House Armed Services Committee, to postpone any decision and prevent any decision to have a base closing effort underway. I mean, here's an important point. The one that was approved before, the BRAC that was approved in the past, still has not saved any money. In fact, it's costing us more for that BRAC than we're saving. How can we go forward? It doesn't make sense to go forward with a new BRAC if we can't show that it's actually cost savings. But beyond that, when we look at the assets that we have here in southern Arizona, particularly at the 162nd and at Fort Huachuca, we have, as I said earlier, better flying time, more flying time, best weather conditions you could find anywhere in the world, and we have an environment here that can actually train pilots and our troops on the ground in environments that they are currently facing and may in fact face in the future. There is nothing that can replicate that anywhere in the country. So we have a lot going for us here in southern Arizona beyond what I've talked about, which is the airtime. If you look at Davis-Monthan, for example, it is the largest boneyard for planes in the country. And why? Because we have weather conditions that can preserve these aircraft should they ever need to be used again and put back into service. We have the 12th Air Force here. We have the air rescue mission here. We have a lot of reasons to protect and continue to preserve Davis-Monthan. Not the least of which is that this has been a national defense asset for 80 years, and it still is doing their job very effectively. It should be continued, and I believe it will be. I will oppose BRAC in the future as I've opposed it in the past.
What about Fort Huachuca? Do we know specifics about what could change besides just a reduction in force?
Well, one of the things that we are concerned about, that I'm particularly concerned about, is the hollowing out of our Army. The Secretary has said that we will reduce the number of troops by 80,000 people. That brings us to just under 500,000 men and women in uniform. The lowest number that we've ever had in uniform since the end of World War II. At a time when the countries, where across the world, we have places that are not countries that are endangering us. We have individuals and groups that are endangering us. We can't afford to reduce our Army to hollow it out to the point where it can't be effective. So that will be an issue for Fort Huachuca. But just as with Davis-Monthan, Fort Huachuca has a tremendous amount to offer our national security. It's the home of NetCom. It's where we can test electronic surveillance in a place unlike anywhere else in the country. It's a natural bowl that excludes all the kinds of signals, so we can actually test things in a fairly pristine environment. We have human intelligence training there. We have the electronic proving ground there. We have the drone program there. There are many things that we're doing here that really cannot be more effectively done elsewhere. We have a lot to offer here. As a function of mobilizing our community and doing my work as a member of Congress representing this region to make sure that the Pentagon has to answer tough questions about why they would even think about a BRAC for these two installations.
Well, what are they going to do? I mean, they have the sequester. I mean, I keep hearing, well, they can't do this, they can't do that, but if they're told by the sequester, especially in 2016, you have to do these things, and they are preparing for these things, what is their choice?
Well, first of all, Congress has to take a different approach. Sequestration is not the way, not the prudent way to cut the budget. I've looked at many opportunities for cutting our deficit that don't include these kinds of across-the-board and irresponsible cuts. Every year, for example, the General Government Accountability Office issues a report that identifies in this last report as much as $80 billion in savings in federal agencies because they've got programs that don't work, are duplicative, or no longer make any sense. We need to go after those kinds of cuts before we start cutting into national defense and some of our domestic programs as well. We also take a look at waste and fraud. We have an $80 billion problem in Medicare. Every year, as much as $80 billion are fraudulently billed against Medicare. That's a huge amount of money. We need to go after it with more vigorous prosecution. There are many ways to cut the deficit, including, of course, getting Americans back to work so they can be not only employed and keep their homes and keep their families together, but also pay taxes, pay the Social Security and Medicare, and no longer need public assistance. All of that makes sense. We can get to budget cutting and deficit reduction in other ways than sequestration. And as I've opposed it from the beginning, I will continue to oppose it until we find a better way.
Congressman, in his remarks today, Secretary Hagel also talked about National Guard units, Army National Guard units, flying Apaches, and all of those going active duty. We have the base up in Marana. Some of them, I guess, would be replaced to the Guard with Blackhawks. Have you heard anything about direct effects to the Marana unit or not?
I don't think we know enough about the detail yet, Chris, to know about that. But I would say that that's one decision. We were asked earlier about what's in this budget that might make sense, and that is the use of that helicopter has been, I think, something I've advocated for many months, and I think could be an effective tool for the surveillance that we need to conduct. But I'm going to be drilling down on this budget over the next several weeks, and I will have better answers to your questions when I see the detail. What we've got today from the Secretary was the broad brush. Of course, he mentioned some specific assets like the A-10, but there's a lot more in there. The devil is always in the details, and I think it's wise to look and see what the proposals are in detail before we can sort out what makes sense and what doesn't. It's real clear to me, though, that divesting of the A-10 makes no sense at all, and we're going to continue to that fight until we're successful.
Congressman, on a more personal note for the actual troops, they're talking about less money to commissaries, which means their prices will go up. We already know there are troops that are on food stamps. They're also talking about reducing the rent subsidy and getting rid of the rent insurance. Those types of things that hit the pocketbook of these people who are serving, including a 1% raise for some of them and 0 for the rest. What's your reaction to that?
This is no way to treat the men and women who join the military to defend the country. We have a commitment to them that we have to keep, not only in terms of decent pay for the hard work that they do, but also some of the other benefits that they rightfully receive. Commissary is one of those. Commissary is not only available to them, but to their families. If we remove or somehow change the pricing policies of the commissary, we're going to put a heavier burden on men and women who are already earning too little, in my view, in the work that they do. So, you know, it's really a very sad commentary on where we are as a country, that we would be not only beginning to divest or propose to divest national assets of importance, but that we'd be treating the men and women who serve us as well as their families in such a poor and shabby manner. We have to fight for them, because the sacrifice that the men and women who are in uniform make is not the only sacrifice that's made. Every single day, the men and women who go to war or deployed or in the service, their families are sacrificing over and over again, and we need to make sure that we take care of their needs as well. And that also extends to taking care of veterans when people leave active duty. We have not fulfilled our responsibility, particularly to the new veterans coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. They need services that they're not getting. This is a battle that I'm engaged in totally, and will not relent until we get these changes that are so important to the morale and the future security of our country.
Anyone else?
We good? Thank you,
Okay.
ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks.
For coming. This is a very big issue, and one that we're going to be talking a lot about over the ensuing weeks. So I appreciate your interest in coming today. We have to let the community know what's going on, and to make sure that they know that I'm going to be there fighting for it all the way. Thanks so much for coming.
What are the chances, though, really? What are the chances, really, of saving the A-10?
I think they're very good chances. You know, we got the language in the law that says you can't retire it in 2014, and that was passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the President. And we will be pursuing similar language in the National Defense Bill again this year. We're not done with this. We've just begun to fight. We've already had 2 rounds, and this is round 3, and we're going to have as many rounds as there are. We'll be in the ring fighting hard to make sure this doesn't happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.